Hello. Welcome to the Southern Bible Thumper channel. Thank you for clicking on the video. We are reviewing Israel's leadership so that we can illustrate the significance of this change that we are now reading about. Right now, we are in 1 Samuel 21. King Saul is becoming the disgraced king of Israel. David has just been anointed to be Israel's new king, but Saul is trying to kill him. So, to just review how we get to this point and to make some additional points, we're going to review Israel's history. So in Genesis 15, God gives Abram a prophecy, and there's 4 parts of it. The first part, God tells Abram he will make him a father of many nations. So when we look from Genesis 7 to Exodus 1, we see the clear connection from Noah to Abram to Jacob to the 12 tribes of Israel. When we get to Numbers 1 and Numbers 4, these are 2 different censuses taken. And the first census in Numbers 1 is for the 11 tribes of Israel that are eligible to go to war. And then in Numbers 4, this is a separate census for the Levites, and specifically for those over the age of 30. The Levites are a special priest class. They help facilitate the events in the tabernacle. So these scriptures fulfill this prophecy. When we get to Genesis 15:13, Abram's descendants will be afflicted in a foreign land for 400 years. So in Exodus 12, the Bible tells us that Israel dwelt in Egypt for 430 years and that Jacob lived in Egypt for 17 years. We know that Israel was enslaved after Jacob's death. So 730 minus 17 is 13. It would make sense that during that time, also when Israel was enslaved, Jacob and all of his relatives, all of them died. His sons, all of them died out. So it would make sense that it would take 13 years in between his death and the new generation of Egypt to become adults and decide to enslave Israel. So these 2 scriptures fulfill this part of the prophecy. We get to Genesis 15, verse 14. God says that he will judge the foreign nation and that Abrams, that was before his name change, Abram's descendants will gain substance. The reason why I ordered these scriptures this way is because the prophecy is in this order. God will judge the nation, and Abram, his descendants, will get substance. So we see in Exodus 12, God smiting the firstborn, God bringing Israel out of Egypt, and Israel stripping Egypt of their wealth. And the way that Israel stripped Egypt was in the previous chapter, Exodus 11. God tells Israel to borrow valuable things from the Egyptians, which they did. The 4th part of Abram's prophecy, Genesis 15:18 to 21, God names the groups of people that were living on the land that God will give to Abram's descendants. And God names 10 groups of people. When we get to Joshua 24, there are 6 groups of people that match what was the list given in Genesis 15. This, to me, is a close fulfillment of that prophecy, but there are 4 groups of people that, the Hivites are not listed in this group in Genesis 15, but just thought that was worth a mention. There are some conditions that God is requiring or expecting Israel to fulfill. So Exodus 23, God tells them, drive out these groups of people once they get in the promised land. We find out by Judges chapter 1 and 2 that they don't. Leviticus 18, God commands Israel, don't behave like the Egyptians or the Canaanites. Don't follow in their sexual practices because it's making the earth sick. Well, they disobey in 1 Samuel 8 by requesting a king to be like the other nations. They also end up following in idol worship, but we'll get to that. Then Deuteronomy 7. Just want to always point out that the entire book of Deuteronomy, Moses is talking, and the audience is the second generation of Israel out of Egypt. So the first generation of Israel are the Israelites who endured slavery and who were delivered through uh, they crossed the Red Sea. They experienced the plagues in Egypt. They crossed the Red Sea. That is the first generation of Israel. The second generation of Israel come after the 40 years of Israel wandering in the wilderness because God tried to get them to take the land of Canaan in the book of Numbers, but they didn't have the right attitude. So after they wandered for 40 years and that first generation all died out, then we get this second generation at the end of the book of Numbers. So now that we're here in Deuteronomy, Moses is talking to this second generation of Israel who was born in the wilderness. They didn't experience the plagues of Egypt. And Moses is giving them all this information. He's not going to be able to go into the land of Canaan either because he disobeyed God in Numbers chapter 20. So in Deuteronomy 7, Moses tells the second group of Israel, destroy these groups of people utterly. Don't show them any mercy because they're going to make you turn away from God. So these are three separate scriptures that Israel was commanded. And so there should be some grace given because by the time we get to Deuteronomy 7, this is a different group of people, but they still were alerted to do this. So there really was no excuse for them to begin turning into idol worship, to not fulfill what God told them to do. Okay, so I also wanted to just mention Genesis 9 and 10 because this curse of Canaan also coincides with the prophecy of Abram. So in Genesis 9, this is the story of Noah who got drunk and he was naked in his tent. His son Ham saw him. Noah has three sons, Shem, Ham, and Japheth. Ham saw him naked, thought it was funny, and told his brothers. His brothers decided to get some sort of cloak or covering back into the tent and cover their father. The Bible isn't very descriptive. It just tells us when Noah awoke, he knew what his youngest son did to him. The way that Noah's three sons are listed in the Bible, it is unclear which one of them are the youngest, but Caanan is Ham's son. Clearly, Noah's grandson also could be his youngest son. When he woke up, he began cursing Canaan. And so there are theories online, which I have totally accepted. The theory that Canaan did something sexual to Noah because ever since then, Canaan has been connected to sexual immorality. When we look at Genesis 10, the descendants of Canaan, his family, the land that they occupy encompasses Sodom and Gomorrah. Also, in Genesis 15, when God told Abram the 10 groups of people that they're living on this land, God is going to give Abram's descendants that land. 4 groups of those people are descendants of Canaan. Third, when we look at Leviticus, the Canaanites' sexual practices were making the earth sick. So it's like everything connected to the Canaanites has something to do with sexual immorality. So that would make a lot of sense to me. The other thing I would like to point out is humor around things that are inappropriate. What if, because again, this is a theory that Canaan was sexually inappropriate with Noah. It's a theory. The Bible doesn't write it out. And I have not seen where that is in the Bible. I just believe that makes a lot of sense. And Ham's response also would help make sense too, because not taking something like that seriously when someone is vulnerable, making a joke out of it, that could set the stage for someone to violate that because there is no sanctity. There is no, let's make sure my father isn't vulnerable. Instead, he told his brothers that his father was in a vulnerable state. So Ham, the one who laughed at it and thought this was a joke, Canaan was the one who might have done something weird. So we know Judges 1, God gives Israel victory, but Israel doesn't keep their agreement. They don't drive out the inhabitants. So an angel confronts Israel, reminds them that the people will become a problem. By verse 11, Israel is worshiping Balaam, plural for Baal, multiple false gods. One thing that, or I'd like to just consider a few things about Israel's status. We know that in Judges chapter 2, Israel falls into idol worship after Joshua dies. Deuteronomy 7, again, when Moses is talking to that second generation of Israel, he tells them, the people that you are about to defeat and live around are mightier and greater than you. Also, want to throw out that idea that we should consider how long these neighboring groups have lived on this land. Canaan's descendants were listed. Canaan's descendants were listed in Genesis 10. Sorry. Okay, so considering Israel's status, Moses tells them that these people are going to be greater than them. These neighboring groups have lived on this land since Genesis 10. Israel was in Egypt for 430 years. Israel is a young community of immigrants. They are building a kingdom. Most of Israel's existence has been in slavery. They lived in the wilderness. In the wilderness, God gave them all these ordinances and laws to build culture and tradition. So in Exodus 23 and Leviticus 23, those are two examples that I think illustrate that God wanted Israel to have a code of conduct, to have some sort of culture and tradition so that they could build a kingdom and have some semblance of a way of life. Exodus 23 and Leviticus 23 both refer to three feasts that Israel is to keep, and this is every year. So the fact that they have an events that they're supposed to attend together every year, that shows that God wanted Israel to come together and do things together as a whole. Also, in Leviticus 23, there's more detail. There's like several other events that God wants Israel to do. But in Leviticus 23:22, God tells Israel, don't gather all your crops, leave some for poor, the poor and the strangers. Just want to illustrate again and emphasize that these people that are living around Israel have been on this land long enough to get it sick in Leviticus 18. And in Leviticus 19, God tells Israel they can't eat from that land for 5 years because of how dirty the land is. So they've been on there long enough, at least, to get the land to that point. Just want to consider that the people that have been on this land, the structures that they probably were able to build, the organizations, the outfits, the entertainment, they probably were much more established as a group and what they had on the earth. And so Israel, who is this new group, this might look this might look some kind of way to them, because they're coming in as this very new group on the favor of God. They're coming as immigrants into a land that everyone else around them has been established for years. You're building yours. And what ends up happening, they fall into idol worship because they don't stay faithful to the mission. They don't stay faithful to building up their own community. And when you go into idol worship, it's like it's like going into their culture, trying to adopt their customs. You're not one of them. And you're usually going to end up getting subjugated, trying to be someplace that doesn't belong to you. And that's what kept happening to them. They would get subjugated, trying to be a part of someone else's culture, which wasn't meant for them. They would get subjugated. And the torture that they would endure would make God so, it said it would make him repentant. And so he would appoint leaders to help them. And they would deliver them from these oppressors every time. But Israel would go right back to it. And so what we see in Judges chapter 2, verse 18, when a judge would die, Israel would return to idol worship. So, in a sense, they were also putting a lot of weight on the leader instead of having this direct connection with God. And the direct connection with God was available because in Judges chapter 1, Israel asked God directly for leadership, and God answers them directly. This is the same openness that we saw in Genesis chapter 25 with Rebecca when she wanted to know what was going on with her pregnancy. God responded. Israel still didn't obey these commands. So by the end of Judges chapter 2, God says that he won't drive out the people. And in Exodus 23, 28 to 33, God tells Israel that he's going to drive these people out little by little so animals don't take over, but don't make any agreements with them. And so they made agreements with them. So now that we've gone over that, I'd like to review Saul's leadership and its significance. First, language used to define leaders. We see that Moses and Joshua don't have a title, they don't have an elevated status or specific duties until Moses' death in Deuteronomy 34. He was named as a prophet. Aaron has a title, but he is a priest. He wears a uniform and gets paid. The phrasing used for people in leadership do not include a title to the name. So, for instance, me, I'm Bible Thumper, a title to the name or, you know, language would be Dr. Thumper. Um, so just want to just distinguish that because when we look in these verses in Judges 4, Deborah judges Israel. It doesn't call her Judge Deborah. The same thing with Eli. He's not called Prophet Eli. Jonathan is not called Prince Jonathan. Okay, so we just see that pattern of no one gets a title in front of their name. This could be a cultural thing. This could be what God intended. I don't know. Okay, so just to review quickly what happened with Israel in chapter 8. They request a new king. Saul is new king. Saul is anointed privately and announced publicly. Saul leads Israel to victory. Samuel allows Israel to discuss issues with his leadership. Jonathan attacks the Philistines for the first time and the second time. And God instructs Israel to destroy the Amalekites in 1 Samuel 15. But this is a problem because King Saul allows King Agag to live and allows Israel to take the best animals. The Amalekites are Esau's descendant with a Hittite woman. And Hittites uh, in Exodus 23 were supposed to be driven out of the land. Also, the Amalekites were supposed to be destroyed because Exodus 17, Amalek attacked Israel when Israel had come out of Egypt and they were looking for water in the desert. God vows to blot their name out of existence. So, chapter 18, Saul grows jealous of David. Chapter 10, Saul hides it. Okay. Sorry. 1 Samuel 18, King Saul gets jealous of David because David is clearly a more courageous man. Examining King Saul. Chapter 10, Saul hides when it's time for him to be announced as Israel's king. Chapter 13, King Saul makes an unauthorized burnt sacrifice out of fear. Chapter 14, this is when Jonathan attacked the Philistine structure for the second time. Before Saul knew that his son would be okay, he requested that the Ark of the Covenant be brought out to help give Jonathan an advantage. Again, out of fear. And on top of that, the Israelites already tried this, using the Ark of the Covenant for an advantage. This was used in 1 Samuel chapter 4. And they were fighting the same group of people, the Philistines. So, again, chapter 15, King Saul doesn't follow God's command out of fear. And now in 1 Samuel 18, King Saul has the nerve to be jealous. So we see 1 Samuel 19, Saul tries to kill David. And as Saul pursues David, he gets overtaken by the Spirit of God and lies on the ground naked for hours. 1 Samuel 21, David and Jonathan create a plan to test Saul to see if it's safe for David to be there. As Saul tries to kill Jonathan, so they decide that David should leave. 1 Samuel 21, David flees to a priest and receives bread and Goliath's sword. He flees once he sees Saul's men there to worship. He goes to Ashish, and Ashish servants make him nervous. So he begins to act crazy, getting spittle in his beard. I hope that helped to make things clearer or introduce some new information that will expand our perspective. I enjoy reading about how things are connected. So thank you so much for clicking on the video. I love you. I love you. I love you. Have a wonderful day.